Every time someone wants to make an argument about K-pop's global potential, BTS appears in the sentence. K-pop can conquer the Western market. BTS proved it. K-pop artists can achieve mainstream cultural penetration. BTS proved it. Korean language music can top the Billboard Hot 100. BTS proved it. The ceiling doesn't exist. BTS proved it. BTS as proof. BTS as evidence. BTS as the single data point that settles every argument about what K-pop is capable of. And I want to spend today making the case that this is one of the most misleading arguments in the entire K-pop discourse. Not because BTS's achievements aren't real. They are extraordinary and documented and deserve full acknowledgement. But because using an exceptional outlier as proof that a system works is one of the oldest and most effective ways of avoiding honest examination of what the system actually produces for most of the people inside it. BTS is not proof that K-pop works. BTS is proof that BTS worked. And those are not the same argument. Not even close. Let me start with what we mean when we say a system works, because I think this is the first place where the argument gets slippery. A system works when it reliably produces its intended outcome for the majority of participants who engage with it under its standard conditions. A healthcare system works when most people who need care receive it. An educational system works when most students who go through it come out with genuine knowledge and skills. A transportation system works when most people who use it get where they need to go. By that standard, by the standard of reliable outcomes for typical participants, the K-pop system does not work for most of the people inside it. And pointing to BTS as evidence that it does is a category error. It conflates what one extraordinary set of participants achieved under highly specific conditions with what the system characteristically produces for everyone else. The K-pop system is very good at certain things. It is extraordinarily good at producing technically proficient performers. The training model, whatever we think of its conditions and its costs, reliably produces people who can sing, dance, perform, and present themselves with a level of polish that other entertainment industries have noticed and tried to learn from. But technical proficiency is not the same as career sustainability, and it is not the same as financial security, and it is not the same as the kind of institutional support that allows a person to build a life from their work. And the K-pop system, when you examine what it characteristically produces for most participants across most of those dimensions, tells a very different story from the one BTS's success suggests. Let me tell you what the system actually produces for most acts. The survival rate of K-pop groups past their first 3 years is low. Most groups that debut do not make it to their 3rd anniversary. Most of the ones that do not make it to their 5th. The attrition is not random. It reflects a system in which new groups are constantly being introduced, in which companies manage portfolios of acts rather than individual careers, and in which the commercial performance of a group in its first cycle heavily determines whether it receives the investment necessary to continue. The groups that do sustain themselves beyond 5 years are almost always at major companies with the infrastructure to support longer development timelines. They are the ones whose companies have the resources to absorb a slow start, to invest in rehabilitation after a difficult cycle, to provide the promotional support that can turn a moderate performer into a stable earner over time. The system rewards acts that are already advantaged and compounds disadvantage for those who aren't. For the typical act at a smaller company, a company without the media relationships, the broadcast connections, the financial resources to sustain and act through difficult periods, the pathway looks significantly different. The first cycle performs below expectations. The company lacks the resources to execute the second cycle at the level necessary to build on whatever the first cycle produced. The group disbands. The members, who may have spent years of their adolescence and early adulthood in the training system, navigate the transition to whatever comes next without the institutional support of the company that recruited them. This is not rare. This is what the system characteristically produces, not as a failure of individual acts or individual companies, but as the predictable outcome of a structure that selects for early commercial performance and does not provide sufficient support for the long development timelines that most durable careers require. Now let me talk about money, because the financial architecture of Kpop careers is one of the most under-examined dimensions of the system, and one of the most important for understanding what the system actually produces. The revenue model in Kpop, particularly in its standard contractual form, is not designed to produce financial security for artists. It is designed to produce revenue for companies. Those things can overlap. A successful act at a major company with a reasonable contract can eventually achieve genuine financial returns. But the standard distribution of those returns across the duration of a typical Kpop contract is weighted significantly in favor of the company. Trainees go into debt before they debut. The training costs, accommodation, vocal coaching, dance instruction, language lessons, styling, production, are often structured as debts that the trainee owes to the company. These debts are repaid from future earnings, which means that in the early stages of a career, before the debt is retired, the artist is generating revenue for the company while retaining very little of what they generate. The argument that this is a reasonable investment system, that the company is taking a risk on an unproven talent and deserves to be compensated for that risk, has surface logic. But it ignores the power asymmetry inside the relationship. A teenager signing a training agreement does not have the legal sophistication, the financial knowledge, or the negotiating leverage to understand what they are agreeing to. The company does. The terms of the agreement reflect that asymmetry. And the terms of the agreement are the foundation of the financial relationship for the duration of the career. BTS's financial situation is not representative of this. At the scale BTS operates, at the commercial dominance they achieved, the revenue is large enough, and the company's incentive to retain them is strong enough that the financial relationship has been renegotiated in ways that reflect their leverage. Their situation tells you what is possible when an act achieves sufficient scale to rebalance a historically unequal relationship. It does not tell you what most artists experience. Let me address the argument that I think is most commonly made in good faith, because I want to be fair to the most thoughtful version of the opposing view. The argument is this: BTS's success proves that the ceiling does not exist. It proves that the potential for global K-pop success is real, and that potential changes the calculus for every act that pursues it. The dream is real, the outcome is achievable, and therefore, the system that allows people to pursue it is validated, even if most people who pursue it don't achieve it. I want to engage with this seriously because I think it captures something genuine about how people inside the system understand their own participation. The dream is real. BTS demonstrated that. The potential is real. The ceiling that the industry tried to maintain has been permanently raised. None of that is in dispute. But here is what that argument does not do. it does not establish that the conditions under which most people pursue the dream are acceptable. It does not establish that the financial terms, the personal restrictions, the physical demands, the mental health costs, the absence of transition support for those who don't make it, it does not establish that any of those things are justified by the existence of an outcome that one group achieved under specific circumstances. The existence of a possible outcome does not justify the conditions under which most people fail to achieve it. This is a logical gap that the BTS as proof argument consistently papers over. And it is a gap that the industry benefits enormously from maintaining. Because as long as the dream is real, as long as BTS exists as evidence that someone can achieve it, the system's conditions can always be justified by reference to the dream. Every trainee who questions the debt structure, every idol who challenges their contract, every group that does not survive beyond 3 years, they can all be answered with, but look at what is possible. Look at what the system produces when it works. The lottery is proof that someone wins. It is not proof that buying lottery tickets is a sound financial strategy. The existence of a jackpot does not validate the conditions under which most participants lose. And the existence of BTS does not validate the conditions under which most Kpop participants experience a version of the industry that looks nothing like BTS's story. I want to talk about what BTS's actual origin story reveals about the system, because I think this is the most under-examined dimension of the way they get used as proof. BTS's early career is not a story of a well-supported act receiving the full benefit of the industry's infrastructure. It is a story of an act from a small company with limited resources that survived against odds that were significant. They did not have the broadcast relationships of the major companies. They did not have the media connections. They did not have the promotional infrastructure that the major labels' acts receive as a baseline. What they had was social media, which they used directly, without the filtering of traditional promotional channels, to build a relationship with an audience that the industry's existing infrastructure was not paying attention to. The global army that eventually became the largest organized fandom in Kpop was not built by the industry. It was built by BTS, communicating directly with people who found them outside of the channels the industry controlled. They succeeded in significant ways by finding routes around a system that was not designed to facilitate their success. And the industry, which had not predicted or supported that success, subsequently absorbed them into its own narrative as an example of what the system produces. But they are not what the system produces. They are what happened when a group found a way through a system that was not designed for them, that did not provide them with the resources it provides acts it expects to succeed, and that required them to build the infrastructure for their own success, largely outside of traditional channels. Using their success as proof that the system works is the industry claiming credit for a harvest it did not plant, did not water, and only noticed when it became impossible to ignore. Here is what an honest accounting of what the Kpop system produces would actually look like. It would count the groups that did not make it past 3 years, not as failures of the individual acts, but as the predictable outcome of a system that introduces more groups than the market can sustain and provides insufficient support for the ones that don't immediately perform. It would count the trainees who never debuted, who spent years in a training system, accrued debts to a company, and ultimately were not selected, who transitioned to ordinary life, having given their formative years to a system that extracted enormous amounts of their time, energy, and capacity, and provided them with no institutional support on the way out. It would count the revenue distributions. What percentage of the commercial value generated by K-pop acts is returned to the artists across the full duration of their contracts? Not at the peak of a career, when the numbers are large and both parties benefit. At the beginning, in the years when the debt is being repaid and the revenue is mostly flowing in one direction. It would count the structural conditions, the personal restrictions, the schedule demands, the mental health support that is available versus the mental health support that is needed, the transition support for artists whose careers end. And it would ask whether those conditions reflect an industry that takes seriously its obligations to the people who generate its commercial value. BTS is in that accounting. As one extraordinary outcome in a distribution that contains enormous amounts of different outcomes, most of which look nothing like BTS, most of which do not receive BTS's attention, BTS's resources after success, or BTS's ability to renegotiate the terms of their relationship with the industry from a position of demonstrated leverage. The last thing I want to say is about what this argument is used for, because I think that is the most important dimension of all. The argument that BTS proves K-pop works is almost always deployed in opposition to scrutiny. Scrutiny of contract terms, scrutiny of revenue distribution, scrutiny of training conditions, scrutiny of the mental health costs of the idol system, scrutiny of what happens to the people who go through the system and come out the other side without BTS's outcome. Every time that scrutiny is raised, every time someone asks whether the conditions are fair, whether the system is structured equitably, whether the industry's obligations to the people inside it are being met, the exception appears. But look at what is possible. Look at what BTS achieved. Look at what the system can produce. And the scrutiny gets redirected. The focus shifts from the conditions to the outcome, from what the system characteristically produces to what it produced in its most exceptional case, from the distribution to the tail. The people who need the scrutiny deflected are the ones who reach for the exception most quickly. And the people who bear the cost of that deflection are not BTS. They are everyone whose experience of the system looks nothing like BTS's story, and who deserves to have that experience taken seriously, rather than answered with a reference to someone else's extraordinary outcome. BTS's success is real. It is earned. It is historic. And it does not answer the question of whether the system that produced it works for most of the people inside it. That question is still open, and it deserves an answer that does not begin and end with 7 people who found a way to be extraordinary.